Morning. So, obviously, there's a lot going on in the world, and it's easy to be depressed or, pessimistic about how things are going. And I think it's a good time because of that to reflect on the future and what humanity's capable of, like how things could be versus how they are in a more kind of optimistic light. And it's hard to see the road there, right? We have very fundamental disagreements as a species about how we get there, but I think largely, if you're talking about your average person, we all want life to be better, right? We all want people to be able to kind of go about their lives, pursuing their own interests, not molesting each other, and, maximizing whatever life has to offer, in line with their own interests, whether that's, something meaningful to them or something enjoyable to them or whatever their pursuits are. And obviously our goals often do not align in that respect. But, people have thought about the future a lot and what that could look like. And I think there's some interesting ideas about maybe where things could end up. And those are kind of interesting thoughts to explore. But if you look at like technology, I think that's really kind of the focus of what the future will bring. And maybe that seems like kind of a dumb thing to say, right? But I think in a very profound way, like existence, humanity will change, not because of environmental factors or because of biological adaptation, but because of things we do to ourselves through technological advancement, which is a novel thing, at least in the history of our planet so far as we know. Unless you want to go to the History Channel and listen to the ancient alien theorists talk about prehistory and civilization and all that stuff, which that's kind of an interesting mental exercise in suspending disbelief and just kind of enjoying the thought of what if aliens had contacted humans like early in prehistory. But, barring that, like, as far as we know, like, life on this planet has not really been able to guide its own change and adaptation. And we've kind of outgrown biological evolution in some ways. And so there's all kinds of science fiction, and futurists who think about, what humanity will look like. You talk about people like Michio Kaku or Ray Kurzweil. If you don't know who those are, they're futurists, and you can Google it. But Kurzweil is an interesting one, and he talks about the singularity, and it's not the singularity as far as physics is concerned, right? We're not talking about black holes so much as a tipping point in the rapid advancement of technological innovation and knowledge to where fundamentally humanity changes into something else. And I think it's easy to see how we could arrive in such a situation, right? It was Moore's Law about, the number of processors that you can fit on a microchip and how, the price was it halves every so many years or whatever to create processors, and we're maybe running into the physical limitations of that, but things like quantum computing might break Moore's law and send us into a new trajectory. But I mean, just on the face of it, right? Like we're advancing rapidly compared to the last few thousand years. Like the last 100 years, 200 years, innovation has exploded, and it's not slowing down, right? And now we're developing things like artificial intelligence, which is just a giant Pandora's box of potentials, both good and bad, right? And you could see how whether through genetic engineering or like mind machine interfaces, and people talk about things like metaverse and virtual reality or augmented reality, augmented human cognition, things like that. We could find ourselves in a position where we are rapidly upgrading ourselves, and the distinction between human and machine starts to blur dramatically, right? Or we reach a point where so much of our lives and our cognition exists outside of our body in some sort of digital space, that we leave our bodies behind entirely and exist as lines of code and self-replicating machines, and at the point, are we really human anymore? And then you think about how quickly machines can process things like calculations. I mean, it's fractions of a second for just massively complex calculations, just far outstripping the capacity of our gray matter. And if we reach a point where again there's this kind of blurring the lines between who we are up here and some sort of mechanical extension of ourselves in a digital space, and then the speed at which our cognition increases exponentially, and we could reach a situation where we're doing thousands of years worth of research and innovation in days, hours, minutes, and if you compress in real time the speed at which you can do those sorts of things, what is the limit to human potential in that scenario, right? And we talk about the idea of the universe being massive, even the galaxy being massive and billions of years old. We've got things like the James Webb Space Telescope peering ever deeper into the distant past, looking at distant radiation from the birth of the universe as far as we can see, and the universe is billions and billions of years old, and so you have this idea of life may have started on other planets, and there might be civilizations that have millions of years head start on us, and what would technology look like given how quickly we've advanced, right? But that assumes kind of a linear progression in technological advancement, not an exponential one, which we're on an exponential curve now. And if you're familiar with Fermi's paradox, right, where is everybody as far as life in the universe? It's massive enough. It should be teeming with life, and at least insofar as we can see, I mean, we're with our limited means of perceiving the universe around us, and it may just be again a factor of distance and time, and that we're never going to interact because it's rare enough that entire civilizations of sentient beings are birthed, progress, and eventually die off without ever having the opportunity to meet each other, just because of the vastness in space and time, the gulf between us. But again, that's kind of assuming a linear technological progression rather than an exponential one. And if civilizations hit a exponential curve in technological progress, then in the space of generations, hundreds of years, maybe we could have civilizations that just vastly transcend our concept of, corporeal existence. And at that point, you start getting into kind of like the metaphysical realm, right? I mean, just highly theoretical notions of the multiverse and whether or not, you could even exist in, one or multiple dimensions, time travel, and our basic understanding of physics goes out the window at that point, right? And what does life and humanity look like? I mean, we're not really humans at that point anymore, and I mean, maybe there are civilizations that turn inward and, exist purely in this kind of digital simulation, for eons of, computing time, while, days or weeks or months in real corporeal time passes. And I mean, you think about, if processing power was, infinitely powerful and complex, and, could you create universe simulations in sufficient detail and scope that they would be indistinguishable from real life? And that gets you into the notion of existence being a simulation. Like, are we living in a simulation? And I mean, is it even possible to know if we're in a simulation or not? And I mean, the whole concept of the multiverse could just be multiple concurrent universe simulations running on the same machine, and there could be an infinite number of machines running an infinite number of similar simulations with, an infinite number of changes in the basic parameters that would vastly change the way that life would play out in any particular universe. And I mean, it's kind of mind warping to think about when you get into detail, right? And again, you start to get into the metaphysical and think about things like consciousness and ultimately where ideas manifest from, and if there's something more than just the chemical processes occurring in our physical brains, so far as we understand them, that is giving rise to thought and cognition and sentience, right? And I mean, is there some deep underlying code in the simulation we're living in that is birthing these ideas? And then you get into even more basic and profound questions about free will and whether we have agency or not, or if it's just an illusion. I mean, impossible to know, right? And I mean, ultimately, does it really matter in how we exist day to day? No, it doesn't. It's fun to think about. It's interesting, but if we're on that exponential curve, then our children, our children's children, their lives could be just drastically different from the kind of life we're living. And how do you guide or inform a sense of morality on that sort of just explosive technological advancement, right? Things like nuclear weapons are terrifying enough as it is, but the danger posed by nuclear weapons may pale in comparison to technological innovations made in the next 20, 30 years that we haven't even conceived of. I mean, again, you think about sci-fi, and I talked a little about Star Trek the other day, but like subspace weapons, which, I mean, subspace is basically like interdimensional, existence, right? And like it's a crazy, sci-fi, not really reality notion. But I mean, if there were layers to reality and different dimensions that you could transit between or send signals between, and then of course you could potentially weaponize it, right? It's mind bending again to think about, right? But I mean, that those premises are prolific in science fiction because it highlights the very real potential for both good and ill of our human achievement. And it seems like our concept of ethics and morality lags behind our technological advancement. And so as we progress, nobody ever stops to think necessarily whether or not we should, right? You think about Jurassic Park, right? They were so concerned about whether they could or not. They didn't ask the question about whether or not they should, right? And this was supposed to be kind of more optimistic, but it is frightening to think about, but awe-inspiring at the same time. And that maybe, despite the dangers, we can innovate our way out of our problems. That we can, exert enough thought and investigation on the world to resolve the kind of more mundane issues of war, poverty, disease, famine, things like that, and then spend all that time and energy investigating more philosophically profound ideas about the nature of reality and whether or not there's meaning to be found in the universe, or things like that. Anyway, my thoughts for the day. Let me know what you think. Are we living in a simulation? I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made there. Certainly, I don't think we would know if we were. Drop a comment below if you enjoy it. Hit a like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. It's been fun.